Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Peter ter Horst. I have the privilege in the next 45 minutes to discuss with my three guests here a very important topic, namely how does the social benefit system in the Netherlands work and what can we learn from Denmark. The Danes can do it, it actually says in the program, and of course that's not true, because in every country there are big problems to overcome, and it's not only a question of IT, of course, but also of culture. I'm sure we're going to touch on those issues here with three very interesting guests. To my right, there's Hans Christian Jelstrup. Welcome, coming all the way from Copenhagen, which is 1 hour flying. So,
thank you.
It's almost the Netherlands. You have a long career in business and IT transformations. And you're responsible for setting up and implementing UDK, and I have practiced it. It's Uitbetaling Denmark.
It's correct.
Same as Dutch. And you can actually UDK base out most of the benefits for Danish citizens.
Yes, 2/3.
To my left, André Hoekstra. He is the interim CIO, if I may call it interim, waarnemend. For Toeslagen, which is benefits. I think most people know what the recent history of benefits at the tax authority means. We will not dive too deep into that because it would take more than 45 minutes. And I just said to you before we started, you still look very cheerful for your job. I think during this conversation you can tell us why you're still cheerful, because you've got a huge task on your hand.
Thank you.
Next to you is Andrei Rogaszewski. He is the chairman of the branch association, if I say it correctly, of all the digital companies in Denmark. And he works very closely together with UDK and the Danish government to improve and modernize the IT systems over there. If that's correct, if you agree with this presentation of yourself, I think we can start. The first few slides are coming from Hans Christian. You will explain a little bit of how the system works in Denmark. I'm very curious to hear you, so I gladly give you the floor.
Thank you. I brought 2 slides to tell a little about the Danish journey of digitization, and I will start with this. We have had digitization strategies in Denmark for the last 20 years, and before that we had some central registers that we had already. The strategies are made between the state, the regions who have the responsibility of the health services, and the municipalities, of which we have 98. And we have built it over the years with 4-year strategies over the time where we started to communicate with public authorities on emails and made digital signature. Later we went over and did a e-account for all citizens. So everybody has a bank account which the authorities know when we have to pay out social benefits. After that we went over to as well having an e-box, meaning all digital communication from authorities could be used. Using these elements of digital infrastructure, the other companies around Denmark, like pension and insurance companies, etc., uses the same parts of the digital infrastructure, meaning we built the society around it. And the latest steps has been to make it mandatory for citizens and companies to use the digital infrastructure when they work or seek via self-servicing elements. A large amount of what we do as well is like automated processing of these things based on the registers. We have centrally about individuals, about income, and about the housing, living areas of people in terms of paying out housing benefit, maternity benefits, pension benefits, and other social child benefits, etc. And lately, we changed some of the infrastructure to make sure that the cyber issues out there, that we get a security level that is higher than we started with, because it moves all the time. My second and last slide is my experience from the last 30 years of the building blocks of doing a digital ecosystem, and try to do it in a simple way. You need to have trust and transparency from the citizens and from the companies in order to do the digital ecosystem and getting it to work with the public in general. You need central registers where the citizens, for the information that not governed by law to use, but governed by the citizen, that they can accept it and they control whether or not we are allowed to use it. And then you need from the basic infrastructure of IT in Denmark, the systems to be able to communicate. And we have a central agency in Denmark who has created these central elements that we use. And then we use the public tender environment to grasp and gain access to a lot of the competences that are out there in the IT companies in terms of helping us building these things and maintaining it. And it has been a travel, and we've used these components in the work I work with to change all the systems we use for pension, for maternity leave, etc., and changed all the systems within the last years, and in that respect has come away from the mainframe systems we had before, because the IT legacy was not flexible enough any longer, and we had to go on. So yeah, that was a little about the Danish journey and what I see as the elements of making an ecosystem, but trust and transparency are very crucial.
Thank you very much, Hans. A first question, you've been walking around here now the whole day, speaking to a lot of people. What would you say is the most essential difference between the Danish system and the Dutch system?
I think the discussions I've had with people around the room is to which degree do you have trust and hence right and support of changing and doing more automated and go that way. We had a high trust, and the government and parliament decided that to save money and put them into warm hands, that was the way for us to go. And from what I hear, it's essential that the Dutch community work with the trust in terms of this and take a step at a time. But that's how I interpret it from the 6 hours I've been here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think that's quite good for 6 hours. André Hoekstra from the Tax Authority.
DG Toeslagen.
DG Benefits within the Tax Authority.
No, Ministry of Finance.
Could I say at the Ministry of Finance, of course. Can I say that you are more or less with your team responsible for creating a new benefit system after the storm?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. It's a big shoe to fill in. But what I can say is that we are at the start of implementing new ways of servicing our public, our citizens, and servicing those people who need more support than in the main systems is available. And I can play with my team a role in implementing those new features in our systems and those capabilities we need to be able to support the citizen who needs that extra help in preventing debt problems, which we see in the Toeslagenaffaire, which is called in the Netherlands. So that is my...
Restoring trust.
Restoring trust, yeah.
I'd like to hear your presentation.
Yeah, my presentation. Let's see. Like the Danish, we use a lot of data available to us based on law to calculate the allowances or the social benefits for healthcare support, childcare support, housing, and daycare. Those registrations, central registrations, like the registration for persons, the income registration, but also other databases we use to calculate that. You see in this picture a four level picture. With the top half is our ministries, who are the departments who are the owner of the legislation. We are only part of the owner of the legislation. Other legislations are owned by other departments. And then the middle layer is like the processing layer, and beneath that are the databases. And then the systems, and then the databases we use to calculate all the allowances. It's a very complex system. We use our own IT, but also the IT of our Dutch tax authority colleagues.
Yeah.
And all that together makes a whole processing chain, which allows us to process applications of citizens for an allowance very quickly and very accurately. 95% or 98% of all applications go through this straight-through processing system. And with that, we are very efficient. But then what we see in the Toeslagenaffaire is that sometimes you lose track or focus on those citizens who get into trouble with large repayments or large debt positions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we are now doing is we are implementing a new system for our backend. We are still using legacy systems for the payment factory and the print and mail factory and the gathering of all data we need. That will be there for a long time to go. But for our own systems, we are implementing a new system, moving to the cloud. We are implementing new features and capabilities to be able to enhance on the support of the citizens who get into trouble. Our service concepts we are implementing in our front ends, but that's still a long way to go. It's a big challenge, and we are getting there, but it's very slow going.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, the government has the ambition to change the legislation on the allowance systems. In fact, they said we need to get rid of them and implement a new system. But what you see in the plenary session already this morning or this afternoon is that the income tax system is this complex that it's not easy to change that in constellation with the allowance system. So that will take some time. And in the meantime, we have to implement improvements in the current system with minimal law changes or major law changes within the current system to make it better for the citizens. So that's what we're doing at the moment. Next slide.
Next slide.
Sorry. It's in Dutch. Okay. That's what I said. Dus we are going to be more focused op toekenningszekerheid. There's more security in what the allowance is during the year in comparison to the end result and the recalculation at the end of the year. We are focusing more on I don't know what it says. Doesn't matter.
On too far away from me.
On security, on trust, on regaining trust for the citizen, and then that the citizen can how do you say that? Trust more on the allowance he gets as a prepayment, mm-hmm. and that the end result is closer to the prepayment he gets every month, because it's on an estimated income, based on estimated income.
Yeah.
And we are implementing, we are trying to implement measures to be more certain about the estimated income, and that it is more accurate in comparison to the definite calculated income. Then the final slide, I guess, there are a couple of steps. We are very much dependent on a new government. They are still in the process of creating one. and getting to terms with an agreement on how the coming 4 years will be visualized or in legislation. But what we see is that we are now implementing measures in the current system and preparing to move to changes in the total system of social security and allowances. And it will be in a period of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
That's my last slide.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Andre. I'm sure we'll have some discussion about your experiences later on. First, I'd like to give the floor to Andre Rogaszewski. Andre, you are, as I said, the chairman of the business side of IT in Denmark. You yourself also CEO of a big firm called Netcompany. What has been the role of the private sector in the Danish system, and what should be the role of the private sector?
I think that's a very extremely interesting question. I think it's changed a lot over the last 10, 20 years because of what Hans said before. We came out of a public, more or less, you can say it loud, monopoly situation, which I think a lot of Western European countries are actually in, because many of the core government systems, now we're talking about social benefits. Let's just be absolutely clear about one thing. Social benefits are not interesting from a system point of view. We are not interesting, the people who make the systems. What is interesting is the legislation, if it's fair, and of course if citizens feel that they receive what they're entitled to receive. If all those things work, we are not interesting. This debate is not interesting. But the problem has been that during the 80s, 90s, I mean, we're talking back in the days, right, when we were young, apparently. These systems, many of these systems were built, automized or digitized at the time. And I think the thing we experienced here in the Netherlands, where we can call it a scandal, or at least a political scandal, but also, a social benefit, children benefit scandal. You will see that happening in many Western European countries at different areas. And the reason why is because we have, and that's not the reason of legislators, it's basically the reason why we also need to system modernize everything. And citizens demand a fair service, and politicians also create new laws. It's just the reality of a welfare society. So we have to be able to modernize. And I think for the Danish private sector, we were involved very early on in this modernization process. So coming from a world where we may have had 2, maybe 3 vendors in total, today we have much more vendors in Denmark being able to bid. And we have a closer cooperation between government and private companies. That goes for both the execution and the operation, but it also goes for the strategy making. Because we consider ourselves being a small country. And we know that we have to be able to set some sort of direction. And we can't set entirely direction, but we need to work closely together. So I think some components or some ideas have to be common, that both the private and the government sector are agreeing to somehow. That could be, for instance, the digital ID, same ID as the bank is using. Or there could be the digital post. That could be giving consent to something as a citizen. Why should we invent that 500 times? And then we also need to agree upon some basic infrastructure. But the rest has to be in a competitive setup where you also acknowledge that some places you actually succeed and you celebrate that. We always talk about the failures. When this went wrong, this public system is too expensive, or whatever. But we very rarely speak about what went right and what is really working well. And I think we need to do that as well. And I'm sure that here in the Netherlands, because sometimes when you listen to all these presentations, you always talk about what went wrong, what is not working. And I know for sure that some things are working very well in the Netherlands every single day, even though you haven't formed a government yet. Most things are working well.
Like if I may interrupt you, Andre, what are you proud of? in the government IT?
Well, we are able to pay out every month the allowances to 9 million of citizens.
Yeah.
We do that every month on the 20th of the month without many disturbances. 1.3 billion euros every month. And that's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
We get 7 million changes per month. We have to process them to make a correction in the allowance for that month or the month after that. And in most parts, for most of the citizens, that works very well.
The country would collapse without.
Well, that's yeah.
That is true.
Yeah, no, but it's
Yeah,
true.
that is
That's
true.
true.
For
That's
most
true.
citizens, the payment on the 20th of the month is very essential
Absolutely.
in being able to pay for all those facilities you need in your daily life. If you don't do that, that's a big problem.
Yeah. Now, it's almost like a paradise has broken out in Denmark, which of course cannot be true. What mistakes were made in Denmark that we can learn of? What went wrong there?
Hans and I, we can probably share a few scandals that there's a lot of mistakes. We also gradually got better. And
Can you name me one scandal?
Oh, yes, I can name you a couple. Because over the last 4 years, Denmark was actually nominated as the best public IT country. But we had our share of scandals too. We had, in the tax department, we had a scandal about collecting debt, public debt. So for quite a long time as a Dane, you could just don't pay your public debt. If you didn't pay we wouldn't collect it. The tax wouldn't collect it. And that actually grew to quite a big amount, and it was quite a scandal. We also had I believe a social worker who collected she collected money for herself, which is not supposed to happen. Cannot be done, but somehow...
It was a lot. It was like 15 million euros.
Yes, to her own account
She
over
was
some
found in
years.
South Africa when it was discovered. So we have our fair share as well.
Yeah.
So, how in your system, because this was of course the big cause of a lot of the problems in the tax authority, the fraud. How much in your system is spent to addressing fraud? How do you deal with it?
We do running controls on different types, looking if some payments suddenly rise to another level, which shouldn't happen because it's an ongoing business, as Andrea just said. So we more or less know per month what should be paid out either in pension or in maternity leave or something else. We do have like fraud detection running as well. Where algorithms where we in agreement with allowed by the parliament can cross some registers and have thoughts, is this right or wrong? And then either by the municipality or in Payment Denmark could then wander and call or discover somehow else with the citizen, whether it is a correct situation or it's a mistake or perhaps ultimately a fraud. Yeah. So we do it, and we have more than 10 people using full-time to look for this, but of course it's regulated again that we are allowed to do it, and we are transparent that we do it. Of course not how the algorithms are working. That's our work, but we are transparent that we do it.
Yeah. And if you look at Mr. Hoekstra's story, what he just told us, do you see a lot of similarities in, for example, how you started a few years ago?
Similarities in terms of, we have a processing system that is working, that is going on, and we had to change it for IT debt reasons. It was not flawless, but it was working very well and had done for a lot of years. So we took the different systems and changed them one at a time, because you can't do it all in one time, and continuously have a focus that the ongoing operation is working, because that's what's giving you both the right and the the air to be allowed to start the change. Because if the operation is not running well, I think the energy put into managing that takes away your ability to start to create the change. So for me, fix the operation, then start to change.
André Hoekstra, when you hear about the Danish experience, what would you see as the main similarities and differences?
Well, we have a fair share of failures as well. Yeah? I think that's for everybody who's working in IT, it's never the first time right. And law changes every 4 years, or during every year with the new tax laws. You have to implement them, and then something goes wrong. The similarities are we are also using centralized data, standardized data, interlinked between governments, and that gives us a certain basis for calculating the allowances and a certain confidence in that. What the difference is that I think with the Danish version is that we are using a prepayment system based on an estimated income. And do a recalculation 6 months after closing of a fiscal year if you have had too much or too little. And that's where a lot of people get into trouble, because if you have to prepay some of your prepaid allowances, and in the day-to-day running of your household, you don't have that much financial room to repay those debts.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem and a big challenge. And we are using risk models to see anomalies in the allowance requests, like the Danish do. And then we act on that and get in contact with the citizen. And we see this anomaly, what's happening here, and is that correct? But the citizen is always in control of his data. If he corrects it, he can change it again to the figures he thinks that are correct in his perspective. So in the end, the citizen is always responsible. We use the data we have from those centralized systems to check if that's correct. And if we see anomalies, we get in touch. But if the citizen says, no, I think this is right, then we leave it like that. And that can, in the end, mean that he has to repay part of his allowance.
Yeah, I know. And how is that solved in Denmark, André Rogaszewski?
Well, I think and Hans can probably come in with more additional comments to that one. But we have more registers where we have updated information. So if you move, we know immediately. If you get your income changes, we know immediately. So we know probably a bit more at the current time. So you don't have to regulate that yourself. And if you do, maybe you can give us consent to help you take the right decisions.
Yeah.
I think another thing I would like to mention here is every crisis or every IT big problem has to be seen also as a chance to change and create new stuff, and because that is a chance. It, as I said before, is a low interest area until something happens. I think in Denmark we've used our crisis, but also we know that this is very important for the country. Like before, it was not that important. No one really cared about it anymore. But if you had to attack a country nowadays or do something wrong, what would you look at? You would look at the infrastructure. It's not bridges and telephone lines anymore.
Yeah.
It is also these systems, and they have to be very, very fair and protected and run in a very, very modernized way where everyone can trust them. Trust is extremely important. And I think we've used the last 10 years, it takes time to modernize all these systems. And many companies in Denmark, including my own, I started with, we are 3,300 people now. And we export many of our government technologies. We use our components from Denmark. But 10 years ago, we were 300 people. And the reason why we can grow and employ a lot of young people, them being proud of making government IT, how can you attract young people, talent, and tell them, well, we're going to do a children benefit system, or we're going to do a housing benefit system. You know, sometimes you look at their eyes and they go, what are we going to do? Why are we going to do this? And then you have to tell them, because of your country, because this is important for your country. And you're actually doing something more bigger than just coding something or programming something. You're actually creating something that will help big parts of your population. And I think we've been through that development in Denmark, and we see much more in the IT sector, a lot of companies involved. And we also see that a lot of competition in creating the best government systems. And we also have what we call bestsellers. So that can even be smaller systems. I mean, small things, driver license that you can show, or the Corona Pass, which we were the first ones to have in Europe. You know, things like that also.
What are you
create
particularly
trust.
proud of?
Sorry?
What are you particularly proud of?
I'm particularly proud of, in general, that if you ask the Danish population, 80% of them, because we've asked, and there's a lot of surveys, and if you ask them, 80% of them, and that's everyone from babies to people being very, very, very in the late phases of their life, they trust digitization and they embrace what is happening. That doesn't mean that they're naive, because if you make a few mistakes, that number could fall. But right now, we are in a situation where, you come up with new ideas and strategies, and most of the population, you always have 10, 15% that are very, very critical.
Yeah.
And that could grow to another number. But right now, I'm very proud that, in these times where so many things are happening, that 80% of the population is actually quite positive. I think that's an accomplishment.
Did we measure that, André Hoekstra, in the Netherlands?
Well, the confidence in the government, not that much. But you see in general that the trust in the government in the Netherlands is somewhat different than in Denmark. You see that with the corona pandemic measures, etc. But also with the Toeslagenaffaire. We have to work very hard to regain the confidence from the citizens. And you asked me earlier, why am I still enthusiastic on working for Toeslagen? Well, when you hit rock bottom, it can only get better. I can't change what happened in the past, but I can do my utmost with my people and my colleagues to make it better in the future. To regain the trust, to enhance the service, to be able to support the citizens better in their day-to-day life with our financial allowances.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it for me very interesting to be working with Toeslagen at this moment.
And what do you expect to be your biggest dilemmas in those next 4 years?
The biggest dilemmas? Well, how we can implement all that is politically asked of us from all different parts of the country, from the citizens, from the politicians, from the new legislation, to be able to be implementing it quickly enough. Yeah. Because you see in the organization where we try to mend what went wrong in the past, there's a lot of people are not that patient anymore. No. So they are waiting long enough and they want it now. But we have to do it very carefully and be sure that the decision we make is a decision that lasts. Yeah. And we don't want to come back on that decision. And so we have to be very careful and very trustworthy in that part as well.
Yeah.
So, and if we do that right, we can rebuild trust.
I see you want to react to that.
I think, for us, it's of course part of it for us to keep it and not make the big mistakes. But at the same time, we have to have the courage to continue monitoring the risk we have and then work with inclusion-exclusion, because 5 to 10% of our citizens are not very digitized, illiterate. And we have to work with that all the time and make sure that we have solutions for that group as well, help them perhaps with voice recognition or something else that could help. So we need to be curious about what we do with those who doesn't have it as easily as some of the others. And of course we will change generations over time, but I think that the challenge coming is having the competences, working with inclusion and exclusion, and working with the technology that moves very fast around us, and a world that in some respects gets smaller and smaller, and in some respects gets bigger and bigger because they can hit us from somewhere else, and we have to be both protected and open. And that's, for me, a dilemma that you have to consider both in terms of skill and in terms of being an open community with transparency.
And if I may, Hans,
Of course.
how do you keep track of those citizens who need that extra service within the total masses of the population who gets the benefit?
We see it in different ways. When we have mandatory self-service laws, you can ask not to be part of that. Hence, we know whom we still have to send physical mail to. So that gives us some of them. And we can hear it on the phones as well. So we try to automate it, make it self-service, and in the end, if not, they can call us. And hence we know who they are and we help them on the phone. So in that way, we know who they are, and we try to figure out which groups are they in terms of considering how better to help those groups, meaning decreasing the amount from those groups that has difficulties if we can help it to be easier for them. Because I don't think it will go away. But we still need to manage that there are groups that we have to help and manage all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge in our e-strategy as well. How do we get that group, which are not that e-adaptive, with this health transformation, and keep them able to be contacting the government when they need it, on a low-key basis, with the phone or with a letter or with a person. And that's very important still.
I ask it, a lot of them, they walk into the municipalities and get the help there. And if they need our help sitting centrally somewhere else, we have set up special phone lines that the municipalities can use to manage the citizens on the spot, meaning now, if needed. So we try to find solutions for that, because that group of people doesn't go away. It could be it gets smaller, but they are there. And we need to respect that and have solutions for that.
Yeah, that's also, Andre, I see the Danish system is far more centralized than the Dutch, which is decentralized. How do you safeguard the human dimension in a centralized system?
Well, I think, as you guys are mentioning, this will never stop. You will always have 5 or 10% of people who probably need some extra help. But at the same time, the other 85 or 90% are probably going to they want even more. Have to remember that all of these people are probably using social media 2 or 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. Yeah. They can do that, apparently. And they have trust in that, apparently. But they talk about trust to government. They don't have trust in their own government. They have trust in some corporate in the US, which is kind of weird. So we have to step up and give them impeccable service, but also at the same time, give them all the advantage of new technology coming, because the world is not standing still. You got health data that can be used for so many great things in the future. You got the whole educational system, where new tools are coming up, and population is just adapting to it all the time. And they don't want to be troubled with some system not calculating right, or some letter coming with 4 pages about what this is. They can't understand it. We've had some examples of elderly people. I'm not saying senile people. I'm just saying elderly people who just want to pay their own bills. Right? They want to pay their own bills. They always pay their own bills. Maybe in the old days they went to the post office. In Denmark today, we don't go to the post office. We don't have. Do we have any post offices? We have a few, but
very few. They are normally.
I don't know where they are.
In supermarkets.
Yeah.
In a corner.
Yeah. As well.
Yeah, here as well, guys.
Yeah.
So, but I just want to pay my bill. Now, why is it that I don't have, on my iPad, I have 4 bills every month or 5 bills? Can I just go like slide, make an interface like that, and you have maybe 5% of the people wanting to do that. Is that a centralized system or a decentralized system? Well, I don't think citizens care that much. What they care about is the execution in time. They don't want to be behind. You don't want to be behind as a country. You don't want hassle. You don't want trouble. You want something from me. They're demanding. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, no one was demanding anything, basically. When we got remember when we phoned up the bank for the first time or someone was sending us something proactively, we're like, wow. Now we want more citizens, and I think that's gonna drive a lot.
I would say as well, their expectations is part of what drives where we need to go. And we have people calling in from one social security area where we ask them a question and they say, you have that information already. And we have to tell them, yes, but
we can't look up.
We are not allowed to use it because the law doesn't say it, so we have to ask you, can't you just use it anyway? The citizen will tell us. It tells something about the trust and the expectation, and the expectation is that they can service themselves 24/7. It sounds ridiculous, but that's what they demand. That's what they are used to when they order trainers or they do something else. They look at our services a little in the same way. Hence, we have to understand that and adapt to it to the extent we agree with the government.
One last point, the political dimension.
Yeah.
Because Andre already touched on it. Why did our tax system become so incredibly complex? Because these politicians, they walk through the candy shop of technology and they want more and more and more and more. You are basically in the pinball in the machine. How do you tame those politicians?
We try to be advisors to the agencies and hence to the politicians in terms of explaining to them what certain parts of new legislation will mean to us as an administration body. And we hope they listen to our advices. But in the end, if the parliament decides something, we of course implement it. But we try to be there in the right time for them and advise them with our experience.
You never said we cannot implement that. Forget
No, we don't do that. But
And
we
you,
try
Andre?
to advise them.
Have you ever?
Well, we say we can't implement it in that way. So maybe if you adapt it a bit, then it's more easy to implement or better to implement. We also try to advise our politicians or the policymakers from our execution perspective with IT and running the business and the processes, etc., etc. And usually upfront that works. You have all the time in the world, and you can have that conversation. But in the politicians' debate in our government, then they get all those adaptations in the law, and they have to decide very quickly on that. And then there's not enough time to advise them at that moment that adaptation or that change in the policy is not really what you wanted up front. But you have to, in the end, if the decision is made and the law is the law, we have to implement it as well. And we try our best.
Andre, 40 seconds.
Look,
40 seconds left.
digitalization has become politics. Politics has become digital. And that's just the reality of it. The good part of that is that we are similar countries in Western Europe. We have same values. We want to protect our democracies. We want to be fair and just towards our publics. We have to learn from each other. We have to steal from each other as much as we can, because we don't want to be invaded by Chinese or corporates or Russians or anything else. We want to define our European digitalization policy.
Beautiful last words. Thank you very much. We're going to remember them. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your interesting views, and thank you also very much for watching us.